Welcome back. Today we have a special edition. We're talking about governance of the petroleum industry, and in studio I have my guest Muturi Kamau, National Network Coordinator for Kenya Oil and Gas Working Group. My first question, and we have to first start with, I have so many questions, but I know every Kenyan watching, their question is just on fuel prices. And that question really makes sense because we have, like, for example, Uganda, the prices are at par with Kenya, yet the oil passes, their oil passes through Kenya and through the Kenyan port. Tanzania, the oil is cheaper, same case in Rwanda. What exactly is happening and going on in Kenya?
Well, thank you for having me. First and foremost, I think one of the main issues that we are currently facing is the change in the fiscal regime, and specifically looking at the petroleum sector. Yeah. With the enactment of the Finance Act, it proposed the increase of value-added tax on fuel from 8% to 16%. I think that's one of the areas that has really seen the fuel prices take a considerable hit. Mm. Well, the argument from government has been that doubling the VAT was to essentially eliminate the import fees, which stood at 3.5%. Yes. As well as the railway levy that was at that stood at 2%. But that still essentially means that government has imposed an additional 2.5% on Kenyans when it comes to fuel. So there's a lot that goes into definitely understanding why the Kenyans are feeling the price as it is. Yeah. And for us to do that, we need to appreciate what is happening in the global market. Yes. First and foremost, crude oil prices, the price of oil is determined by global prices of commodity. Mm-hmm. And you have these 23 members of OPEC Plus. And one of the major issues that right now we are facing is that countries such as Saudi Arabia have decided to cut back on the production. Yes. And we just saw up until July, they decided that they are going to hold an additional 1 million barrels. Yes. So it really then essentially means that it's driving the cost of the crude oil prices to skyrocket. Mm. And essentially that means, even for us as a country, the oil marketers who are essentially supposed to import this crude oil through the open tender system, yes, are definitely getting it at a higher price. Normally the pricing is determined by a mechanism called the Mediterranean Platts, yes, that we normally use. And so by the time that gets to Kenya, because once these 90 plus companies bid through the open tender system, the one with the lowest value is the one that gets the business. Yes. And is the one that then is essentially supposed to import refined product, yes, on behalf of the country, as well as other oil marketers. Yes. So once that happens, then the Kenya Pipeline Company, together with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, together with a few other stakeholders, then sit down to determine through the petroleum pricing regulations, of course being oversighted by EPRA, how the prices are going to be set. Yeah. So that's what for the 15th or the 14th of every month we are able to get that particular update from EPRA as to the outlook of the prices every month. Yes.
You've talked about other players in the industry, and some even like in Saudi Arabia, and there was a conversation, a clip we had earlier, and that was the CS of Energy, Davis Churchill, saying and telling Parliament essentially that Kenyans need to brace for even harder times, and saying the same thing that you are saying, that there are other players and other stakeholders. So, but he made it sound like the government's hands are completely tied when it comes to fuel pricing, and they're not entirely to blame. What is your position on that?
Well, that is a bit alarming, considering that first and foremost, this is a government that we elected, and we are really relying on the government to give us direction. But notably, I would presume the reason why his sentiments are as such is because in the medium-term plan strategy that with regards to the amount of funding that we were getting from the IMF, one of the conditionalities was for Kenya to look at its excise, the cost on excise duty for fuel, that essentially will actually go up, and what the argument is that it is to deal with the externalities of utilizing fossil fuels in a world that is actually changing to renewables. So we definitely might actually be in this thing for quite a considerable period to come.
So no good news.
And he has just told us that the stabilization fund does not have money. So
in fact, the then industrialization minister CS Moses Kuria did tweet last month, and he said prices are likely to go up to even up to 250 by February. Is there some truth to that?
There could be. If you're looking at what I just mentioned, the medium-term plan strategy, then first and foremost, we saw government had taken a really hard stance with regards to that, and specifically reviewing the excise fees on fuel. But considering that through refined product, that is one of the easiest avenues for government to generate income to offset some of this debt that we have accrued over time, then it only does make sense for us to go that way. But I would then foresee a situation where government feels pity on its citizenry to then tap into the stabilization fund, considering that we are actually paying there's actually some money that's going into that particular fund every single time we actually fuel at the petrol station. Yes.
And even in a recent meeting by the Petroleum Institute of East Africa conference, the minister was talking about which minister was it? It was the finance minister who was talking about the bottom-up economic transformation agenda and how the government is looking to place policies to deepen PPPs and look for opportunities in the sector. What opportunities are there in this sector right now for Kenya?
Well, I think first and foremost, there's one thing that we had started as a country, and that was essentially getting an investor to undertake exploration of hydrocarbon quantities in Kenya. Not just one. In this case, I'm focusing on tall oil and its project in Turkana. But most importantly, we've seen an increase in the number of oil and gas areas that are being set aside for exploration. So I think in as much as the current government regime has come out to say that by 2030 we will have made 100% transition to renewables, there's still extensive opportunities when it comes to the development of fossil fuels. And simply because if you look at the South Lokicha oil basin, for instance, Talo has come out to say that recoverable quantities of crude oil stand at an estimated 585 million barrels of crude oil. However, peak production values against the development plan stand at around 900 plus million barrels. In an area that we have been told that we have commercial quantities of crude oil, which we refer to as the stocked oil in place, that stand at around 4 billion barrels. So that is crude oil that can actually, and specifically looking at the revenues, we can actually definitely utilize those particular revenues to advance our investments in renewables, as well as just invest in research and development that can see us make this transition to renewables and others.
Yes. Yes. And do you feel the commitment by government in creating favorable policies and regulatory framework, especially when it comes to enhancing competition efficiency? Do you feel that commitment?
Yeah, I do believe in the last I think about decade or so, we have seen an exponential rate of governance frameworks that have been developed.
Yes.
We now have the Petroleum Act 2019. Before we were making reference to the Petroleum Exploration and Development Act, Cap 38 of 1986. We have the Energy Act of 2019. We now have the Climate Change Amendment Act of 2023. So in terms of ensuring that there's a favorable climate for investment,
yes,
I do believe that the previous government regime as well as the current government regime has really tried to ensure that we have proper governance frameworks that will ensure that.
Yeah.
I think we still have a long way to go, because formulating policies is only the first step.
Yes.
Implementing them then becomes the other step that we need to actually actualize.
Yes.
Yes.
And what about when it comes to the capacity, the whole value chain from upstream going on? Do you also feel that, yes, there is that commitment?
Well, it essentially seems contradictory, yes, for government to look at opening up areas for exploration while it's committed to transiting to renewables energy, full transition by 2030.
Yes.
However, it is becoming more evident that that transition may not come as soon as we want it, because as we are right now, government Kenyans are actually feeling the brunt of the crude oil, the crude oil prices globally,
yes,
which is affecting the prices locally. So if you're looking at upstream, then we need to consider being in a situation where we tell investors that in as much as this is one of the industries that has the highest emissions, then we need to be working towards having net zero carbon barrels of crude oil, changing project design to incorporate more renewables, so that we are talking about emissions at scope 3 level, which means that these are the emissions from vehicles. One of the things that, again, in the medium term plan strategy that's supposed to be implemented by Kenya, is that IMF has also put a conditionality that within the next, between 2024 and 2027, that there could be potential of having carbon tax.
Yes.
So for you as someone who has a vehicle, there could be some tax that will come to you as a result of the scope 3 emissions from the vehicle that you're driving.
Yes.
Yes.
And talking about that, we did see a summit happening on clean energy, and we saw even the president driving a clean vehicle and talking about electric vehicles and going green. Are we likely to see that seriousness when it comes to climate change, that we even phase out from the combustion engines? And what is even right now the advice that people who want to put up petrol stations and so on getting at the moment?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to attend the Africa Climate Summit, and yes, one of the interesting things is that I saw one of the vehicles that are powered by the EV electric vehicles.
Okay,
yes.
Yes.
And it was going for a whooping 8 million Kenya shillings.
Wow.
And so for any Kenyan,
so it still feels like it's a dream.
It still feels like it's a dream. Yes. We shall get there one day, but I think there needs to be some form of subsidy to encourage Kenyans, yes, to actually uptake more electric vehicles. And so, countries like Norway, for instance, actually do have tax exemptions for people who import EVs. So I think these are some of the strategies that we need to now actually look at when it comes to the implementation bit of it.
Yes, yes, yes. I just want to go back a little bit to pricing.
Yes.
Price capping was supposed to be a solution. What exactly happened there? Is liberating the market the way to go? What happened to price capping?
I personally believe that it was meant to ensure that retailers tend to get in terms of breaking even, because it had gotten to a situation where they were getting product, this is refined product, at almost the cost of what it would go at retail level. So that is one of the things that with the new petroleum pricing regulations of 2022 has actually tried to address, so that at least even retailers can actually then in terms of generating more revenues, they can actually do that, as opposed to having very minimal margins that really do not make sense. Yes.
Now it looks like and you gave us the bad news, we are not likely to see the prices going down. So perhaps this is time for us to strategize and look at the other options. One of the other options is that we have had for a very long time that there is oil in Turkana. How far has that gone?
All right, so just a bit of context. Tallow oil got into the country, I think it was late 2008, 2009. But the company, through its exploration efforts, was able to strike oil by 2012. It currently holds about 4 concession licenses within Lake Victoria and Turkana region. And the most promising blocks are within Turkana South and Turkana East, where the 2 blocks are Block 13T and Block 10BB.
Yes.
And so what happened is that, this came as welcome news. In fact, I work a lot with Turkanas, and the expectation just shot up. Until today. Those communities are asking, we are sitting on crude oil. We are here expecting to reap from the revenues of the hydrocarbon quantities. And yet now we are talking about, energy transition. And so by 2019, 2020, then due to COVID, in terms of operations, the company would not sustain. And so it had to make its own adjustments to ensure that it keeps afloat. As it is, so far, the Project Oil Kenya partners, that is Tallow and the previous companies, Africa Oil and Total, had, as of 2021, submitted the field development plan to the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum, together with the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, as well as, according to the Petroleum Act, that field development plan is supposed to be ratified by Parliament. And so that is actually what we are waiting for. But according to what we've seen lately, it seems that we possibly will see quite a bit of action as we now transition to development. And the interesting thing about the Turkana landscape is that we will not only see development, but we'll also see more exploration. So we could potentially see more hydrocarbon quantities come from Turkana. As it is, they've drilled an estimated 40+ wells within about 6 or 7 oil fields. And NLC recently, the National Land Commission recently gazetted that it will begin the process of acquiring land within the Lapset corridor. This is a crude oil pipeline that's supposed to start in Turkana and end in Lamu. And so once all this happens, because these are regulatory requirements, including the undertaking the environmental and social impact assessment study, which was undertaken for the pipeline, was undertaken in 2019, and for the upstream and Make-up Water pipeline were undertaken in 2022. And so once, it's sort of a checklist. Once they do all these things, then we will be able to see government together with Tallow come out and say that now we have reached the final investment decision, meaning that they are ready to put in money. The estimated amount that will be needed for the upstream and the midstream development, production and transportation from Turkana to Lamu is estimated to be about 2.2 billion. Some Kenyans have come out to ask, why don't we set up a refinery?
Yes.
Setting up an upgraded refinery would cost about $16 billion. So essentially, it means we need to have a lot of crude oil development in order to set up a refinery, because again, operational costs are something that would be of challenge to us. 585 million barrels. If you compare that to Uganda, who have an estimated 2.3 billion barrels, then the quantities, in terms of economies of scale, it just makes more sense to export that crude oil to international markets.
You did mention the people in Turkana, and I do want to find out how will they also benefit. I know you're very passionate about that. You've mentioned Uganda, they're drilling oil. How can Kenya position themselves? We did talk about pricing and what exactly is going on in Kenya. What are some of the factors that are affecting the price of oil in Kenya? And now we were getting to a project that I know is very dear to you, and you just spoke about even working in Turkana. But let me talk about, before we even go back to Turkana, Uganda is drilling oil. We found out a few years ago that the pipeline wouldn't be passing through Kenya. But how can we position ourselves, because they are a neighboring country, to also benefit from their oil?
Thank you. I think first and foremost, I think we need to appreciate the fact that Kenya and Uganda have really come a long way in upstream petroleum development.
Yes.
Uganda has an estimated hydrocarbon reserve of about 6 billion barrels, and they intend to evacuate about 2.4 billion barrels from the Tilenga and Kingfisher oil fields, which are along the Lake Albert. Discussions had begun about looking for a suitable route for the East Africa crude oil pipeline. Unfortunately, Kenya, due to the tariffs that were involved, as well as the geographical landscape, then we did not become a suitable direction for the pipeline.
Yes.
However, as compared to Kenya, Uganda intends to build a refinery, and essentially what we would then see is that as a country there's the opportunity of importing refined product from Uganda. That is one. Two, with regards to the South Lakesha oil basin in Turkana, then there's also the option of redirecting our crude oil to Uganda to the refinery. So those two angles give a very best case scenario for Kenya with regards to the position of the oil exploration activities in Hoima, Uganda.
Yes.
However, the East Africa crude oil pipeline has faced a lot of challenges from civil society actors, both within the region and internationally, because of the supposed emissions from having the pipeline itself. Two, in terms of issues to do with land. Land acquisition has also been a challenge. And pretty much just three, and which is more important, the implications of oil spills within the pipeline route. So a lot of concerns. We have seen some banks pull out as a result of duress from civil society actors. We have seen other banks come in, and especially from the Chinese. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. But I think the Uganda government is really keen on seeing the pipeline go through from Hoima to Tanga, Tanzania. Yes.
Let me get to a topic that's a bit more dear to you. You mentioned about the people in Turkana excited that there is oil in their land, they are sitting on liquid gold. In your experience, what do nations go through where there is lack of equitable, sharing of resources? Nations like, and we see it, say, even in Nigeria. What are some of the effects that such nations go through, and what are we doing in Kenya to ensure we do not go through the same?
Yeah, I think one of the more critical factors has been to how does government and other stakeholders really manage expectations of these communities.
Yes.
Infrastructure security is the second one. As it is, I have been to over 15 wells, and most of them do not have fences, unfortunately, which brings the element of infrastructure security. But more importantly is to also look at issues to do with revenues. In the Petroleum Act, it stipulates that 70% of revenues accrued from hydrocarbon extraction will go to national government. 20%, 75%. 20% would go to county governments, and 5% would go to host communities affected by oil and gas exploration. Now, one of the challenges that we have seen in Turkana and also Lamu is that hazardous waste management has been at the core of some of the issues that have come about in Turkana. We have seen cases where landfills that hold drilling waste, which is contaminated with naturally occurring radioactive materials as well as heavy metals, leak outside the well pads to unsuspecting communities. For instance, in my work in Turkana, I have heard of cases of cancers come up. We have had of cases of miscarriages from women, so it's quite unfortunate. If you traverse the landscape, you will notice that a lot of the manyatas are covered with the high density plastic liners that are used to hold the waste. So these are some of the things that we need to learn from and correct as we move to development. I know one of the plans is to set up an integrated waste management plan that will seek to properly deal with issues such as waste. But as we are looking at improving our governance frameworks, we now have the proposed Natural Resources Beneficiary Bill of 2022. Now, that particular bill is actually coming into place to harmonize revenue sharing, not just within the petroleum sector, but within other natural resource sectors, within the mining sector, within the wildlife sector, within the water sector. And it proposes that 60% of revenues goes to national government, and 40% of revenues goes to counties and communities, whereby the 40% again will be divided into the ratio of 60% to communities affected by oil and gas, or rather natural resource exploitation, and 40% to county governments. Now, it is a very important bill because it also highlights the role that communities can play, not just by getting the revenues, but the non-monetary benefits that can accrue as a result of this exploration and development activities. So it mandates that investors will need to get into county benefit sharing agreements with communities in order to ensure things such as development, to identify development priorities for communities. And I think that would really go a long way, especially for a community such as the Turkana community, in ensuring that they, looking at it from the perspective that they're the ones who are most affected by exploration, then they also need to be taken care of. Yes.
And I know you have, a little bad told me you have a presentation tomorrow as we come to an end. What is your presentation about tomorrow? So
the National Assembly Departmental Committee on Environment, Forestry and Mining, which is now focusing on the bill and discussing the bill, will be, as of tomorrow, getting submissions from different stakeholders. And we are really hoping that, the bill has faced quite a bit of challenges in the past. It has been withdrawn, I think, 1 or 2 times. This is a bill that was first published in 2014.
It tells you there is a lot of interest behind the scenes.
Exactly. But we are hoping to see that all stakeholders can agree that this is a very, very crucial bill that will seek to give communities a much better share. Because if, for instance, how we were computing it is that if you compare communities getting 5% in the Petroleum Act and now getting more than 15%, then we definitely opt for the 15%. And then also in terms of just ensuring that the non-monetary benefits accrue to the communities. And you're looking at technology and skills transfer, knowledge transfer, the supply of goods and services, employment, Parliament and such. So those are some of the things that we are really keen to see if this bill is actually enacted, and we are really hoping that it does soon.
Yes. All the best in your presentation.
Thank you very much.
It was so good to have you, Mr. Muturi, with us. We're also supposed to have Patrick Obath, who is an expert and a consultant. Unfortunately, he's out of the country. It was meant to be a Zoom interview, but due to a technical hitch, we could not have him tonight.